I'm Monish. I took the MCAT in August of 2025, and I ended up scoring a 523, which is a 99th percentile score. I'll put it up somewhere on the screen as I'm saying this. But the reason I want to make this video was to give a full MCAT retrospective of everything I learned, from registering for the test to walking out of test day. And it's not going to be easy. I'm not going to lie and say it's going to be a breeze, but I think the MCAT is a lot more manageable than people make it out to be. And so I just wanted to share my experiences with anybody else who's kind of in the same boat and a little bit worried like I was. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. When you're registering for the MCAT, make sure you know when you're going to take it. I registered only about 3 months before I took the test, and the closest available testing location was all the way in Chattanooga. That's a 3-hour drive, a hotel night stay, wake up in an unfamiliar location, and then I take the MCAT. So a lot of hassle I would have had to go through. Luckily, I was able to change to an Atlanta location. The rescheduling fee was about the same as the travel, like what it costs, so definitely worth it. If you don't get the exact location you wanted, it's not the end of the world because people do drop out. Just sign up for the wait list, and especially around those 30-day, 60-day deadlines, people will definitely drop, so just keep refreshing and you should be able to get it. If you're wishy-washy about when you're going to take the test, definitely revisit your study plan and make sure you'll be adequately prepared for the test, because the worst thing you can do is do all this work and do all this preparation and then cancel, no-show, or even void your exam. Well, when it comes to the hours, between mid-May and late July during my summer term, I studied maybe 1 to 3 hours daily, which isn't that much, but outside of that time, it was a lot more judicious. So that week between the spring and the summer semester, as well as the last 3.5 weeks or so before my test, when I was back at home, I studied maybe 7 to 9 hours, so a lot more. Those last couple days, I was feeling a little burnt out. I was also going to a concert as well, so I cut it down to maybe 3 to 4 hours a day instead of 7 to 9. But overall, somewhere between 300 and 500 hours, which is, I understand it's a big range, but it's also a very personal thing, how much time it'll take you to study and how much it takes to feel prepared. So I can't give an exact number, but it was between 300 to 500 hours, somewhere in there. But one thing is, you need to have a really strong study plan. I think the reason I was only getting that 1 to 3 hours was because I wasn't sticking to my study plan really hard. But after I came home, July 25th, I came home, July 26th, I was writing down on a big whiteboard every single day what study I was doing, what topic, what questions I was doing, how many questions I was doing, etc. So I was very regimented in those last couple weeks, and I felt like that really supercharged my ability to study and prepare for the exam. But as long as you have a good study plan, and I think also a good tip is to include catch-up days, because you can never know exactly when you might randomly get sick, you go out with your friends for a day, and say you get really tired or whatnot. So having those catch-up days allows you some leeway, and you don't have to be perfect every day and hit that benchmark, because once you start going down and spiraling, it's really hard to reset and kind of stop being discouraged with your study plan. So make sure you stick to that. So when it comes to my preparation, I used 3 primary resources. 1 was the UWorld Comprehensive Prep course, 2 was the AAMC full-length exams, and 3 was Yusuf Hassan's YouTube videos. I'll talk about those 3, all 3 of them in turn, and also I'll give some recommendations of some other things that I've seen people talk about as well. I got the UWorld Complete, which came with books, some videos, flashcards, a question bank, and also came bundled with all the full-length exams from AAMC. The books are fine, all the content review is fine, there's nothing too crazy about that. What you need to know, you'll learn it from the UWorld, but the question bank is gold. It's the best thing about UWorld, and this alone is honestly worth the entire course's price. These questions are the best you'll get outside of AAMC material, and these are the best explained questions out of any material that you can find. Every single question, what answer choices, what's right, what's wrong, why it's right, why it's wrong. There's usually a paragraph or 2 about what concept you would need to know to understand how to get to the answer. And usually there's an accompanying diagram as well. So they're very well done, and I think most of the value proposition of UWorld lives inside the question bank and the explanations in the question bank. So yeah, I'll ride hard for the question bank for sure. Content review, you can take it or leave it, but question bank for sure, make sure you pick this one up. On average, they're a little bit harder than the actual MCAT, but I think that's good. You over-prepare a little bit, but it's not so over-tuned where it doesn't even map onto the actual test, where you're practicing for a much harder test. I think the writers did a good job of mapping a slightly harder test than the actual MCAT, but maintaining a lot of the same distributions and whatnot. So those are my thoughts about the UWorld. Definitely the QBank is something you should consider picking up if you can. Next, we can talk about the full-length exams from the AAMC. There's 4 paid ones, there's the free scored one, and then there's a free unscored one. These are required for you to take. I think before you take the MCAT, if you haven't seen these six tests already, I think you're actively doing a disservice to yourself. So at least a couple of them you should also start at the same time and emulate as much of the testing conditions as you can. Obviously, test day nerves or driving to the test center itself, you can't really replicate easily at home, but make sure you acclimate yourself to most of the testing conditions because it'll really help on test day. I would say hang on to maybe one of them for the week before or the week of, just not the day before, as a final checkpoint. But yeah, these FLs are your guiding lights essentially to see where I am in relation to my target score and where I would need to be to get to that target score. So very much these are required for MCAT practice. All right, the last major resource I used was Yusuf Hassan, and let me glaze this man for a little bit because everything I learned in Biochem was straight from the Yusuf Hassan videos. I even dropped the book just to watch the Yusuf Hassan videos, honestly. He has video series on biochem, chemistry, OChem, and the biology sections. The psych, soc, and the physics sections he doesn't have, but his lectures are based on the Kaplan books. If you have those, they also fit along with that. Yeah, definitely one of the best resources on YouTube, and it's completely free and everything. His notes are also available, and I think I wouldn't have done nearly as well without those Yusuf Hassan videos. I think his lecturing style really fit with me, and it's not for everyone, but if you can see those Yusuf Hassan videos and it works for you, definitely take advantage of them. I think they're some of the best resources that I've ever used when it comes to learning this content. Yeah. Before I jumped into the content review section, I want to talk about some personal/individual factors that I think helped and hurt me while I was preparing for the MCAT. I know I'm not the only person taking the MCAT, and I can't expect that everybody has the same traits as me and whatnot. So these are going to be unique to me, but they're also not going to be universal to everybody. So I just want to disclaim that out of the way before I jumped in. First off, I need to thank my family all the time because they're the reason that I could do all of this. I don't have to worry about, say, affording the prep materials, paying a bill, working a job, or even like food where I'm at home and my mom would just make food for me. I don't have to think about going to the grocery and spending all that time. And all that time I can put into studying and whatnot. Another thing, extracurricular wise, I did chess through K-12 and then I've done academic bowl all the way since 6th grade. These are quote unquote intellectual hobbies, right? And so especially with academic bowl, I've been exposed to a lot of random crap. I haven't really learned about it, but I've heard of it, so it kind of helps, right? And these tournaments, they're long days. A lot of times you're even driving several hours to get to the tournament, and then you're playing like 10-hour tournaments, right? So the endurance aspect of the MCAT, I think I've sort of trained myself a little bit with my chess and my academic bowl tournament experience. Also, I've always been pretty good at standardized tests, so the time aspect, that time crunch, is often a stumbling block for people that wasn't as much of a problem for me, I would say. So those are some of the, I guess, positive things that helped me during my MCAT preparation that aided in getting my score. Unfortunately, I'm pretty awful at time management unless there's a deadline bearing up on me. I'm kind of a serial procrastinator. I know in June and July, I definitely wasted a lot of time in Instagram Reels and Clash Royale. They really kind of got their grippy little hands on me. I think that last couple weeks focus, if I were able to tap into that on the daily, on the regular, I think I'd be kind of much farther than I am right now. But you live and you learn, right? I think I tried to mitigate this by separating out my play and workspace, essentially. I would get out of the house all the time. I try to go to the library just to kind of reset my mind, try to get into the focus of working. Another thing, I didn't really build a pure habit out of studying during the June and July months especially. I'd go into these like binge withdrawal cycles where I'd do a ton of work, do several days worth of work with using the UWorld study plan, and then the next couple of days I'd rest a little bit and say do one or two things and not build off the momentum that I had. So definitely time management and work habit studying I didn't really do a great job of, especially in the earlier months. I think later on I was able to catch up a little bit because of the pressure of, oh, it's next month, caught up to me. But definitely I was not as judicious as I could have been when it comes to my study schedule and the time I had on my hands. All right, I got a haircut, I'm back home, we're feeling good. Let's talk about content review and studying in general. If I were to break down my study, I think this would be approximately how I did it when it comes to content review, which is in the blue, versus practice questions, which are in the green. So at first, it's always content review focused with
practice questions just to make sure that it's in your head a little bit, just making sure you learn what's actually on the exam. And then practice questions are what come later, and you're biasing towards practice questions towards the end of the study. The day before, maybe like the day of, you don't really want to burn yourself out. So just a little bit of content review, just a one pager on the highest yield topics. That is probably for the best. But overall, I would say that content review is where the easy points on the MCAT live. Meanwhile, practice questions is where the hard points on the MCAT live. So what do I mean by that? So if I were to draw out a scheme of all the points possible, everybody starts in this box, right? This is your confidence interval. This is probably where you expect your points to be. Because if you don't have any study, you're not going to do very well, right? With content review, this box will shift forward until it hits a certain cap. I've arbitrarily chosen 510, which may or may not be kind of generous, but there's a certain point where just doing content review won't help anymore. And all it will do is increase this bottom line of this point box until you hit the cap, right? There's this point floor that content review gives you, and then a point ceiling is what's extended by more practice questions. Because the MCAT, more than a normal knowledge exam, is almost like a language exam. You have to learn the language of the MCAT, and the words of the MCAT is these contents in the concepts that you learn in the content review, and then the actual grammar and speaking exercises is what the practice questions are doing. You're translating from MCAT to English back to MCAT all the time, and that's the main takeaway of this section. So content review, point floor, question review, point ceiling. And so one last thing I want to touch on is yield, which every single book will really touch on, because there's some topics that you need to know, right? Amino acids, if you don't know them, you're throwing away lots of points, really. Because 4 to 5 questions minimum are dedicated just straight. If you know your amino acids, you will get that right. And then even more on top of that, if you know your amino acids, you'll proceed to the answer. And it's not directly an amino acid question, but it's flavored by that, essentially, right? On the other hand, if you're studying some random low yield item, it's going to be 0 to 1 questions on your exam. And more likely than not, it's going to be favored towards the 0. Let's say 0.25, right? Every 4th MCAT, you're going to expect to see 1 question on it. So obviously yield is the most important thing to consider when you're doing content review. The higher yield items are the most prioritized, and the lower yield items are less prioritized. And if you have time to do and time to cover it, then you can go over it and whatnot. So those are the general concepts when it comes to content review. And then I'll talk about the individual sections one by one afterwards. Chem Phys, it's kind of weird because the other sections have their own hallmarks that people latch onto. Cars is the reading comprehension section. Biochem is the big pathway section with all the content you need to learn. Psych Soc is usually the quote unquote memorization section that people just spam Anki for. I'm not sure if I agree fully with that, but I see the vision there. Chem Phys, on the other hand, seems like they stapled 2 other sections together, especially since Chem has a lot of overlap with the Biochem section. Physics is kind of on its own. They don't really test similar topics nearly at all. But the major through line with Chem Phys is that there's no formula sheet, there's no calculator, and there's no calculus. These are all 3 really important things because it limits you, yes, but it also limits the AMC on what they can even ask you, right? Calculus was invented to do physics pretty much, and there's a lot of physics questions that are ruled out because they can't ask you to solve an integral and whatnot, right? So when it comes to content review for Chem Phys, you really want to make sure you have your formula sheet ready and fully memorized pretty much. I wrote my own and then I referenced it with another one that was really comprehensive. I will leave a link to that one. I think that's a really good resource. And then question review later on is what refines your knowledge of, oh, this is high yield. Oh, this question comes up a lot. I should definitely know this formula. I wouldn't really recommend just trying to cram all the formulas into your head because there's so much other crap going on day of, and you may forget a couple and you try to slam it down on your wet erase board the day of the exam. So try to have that in your head fully before you go into it. So let's talk about the individual sections themselves. So physics-wise, there's a couple of sections that I was completely scared about, and physics was definitely one of them. Optics and waves are still kind of wishy-washy for me, but if you maintain 2 things, physics will pretty much be solved. Equations, get your equations ready, and get your units ready. These 2 things are going to carry you through physics because actual conceptual knowledge is a lot lower compared to, say, the amount of biology you need to know is way more than the amount of quote-unquote physics you need to know. So make sure you keep your equations in check and your units in check. It will really help you solve a lot of questions because dimensional analysis, my beloved, will save you time and time again. Because a lot of the time, since you don't have a calculator, they're going to give you answer choices, like if the answer is 10 micrometers, then they'll give you 10 centimeters as an answer. There's a couple degrees of 10 off. And as long as you maintain the units and you keep your zeros about you, you get a lot of the physics questions right. And question practice is probably the most important thing here, because it's on that math side of things, just knowing which equation to apply, which units to look for. That's not really a content review type thing. That's a straight question review thing. But chemistry wise, it's a lot different than physics, because this is super passage based analysis. Similar to the biochem section, but passage and then applying your knowledge is the real crux of the chemistry section. So knowing a random factoid won't honestly get you that many points, but knowing concepts over details, that is the main point of the chemistry section. You want to be able to read the passage, know the general concept, and think about what they're asking for. So there's going to be a lot of stuff to cover in chemistry, but you don't need to know like exact facts, right? Oh, iron will lose this many electrons and have this electron configuration. You can reasonably reason it out as long as you have the broader concepts ready. One major exception to that is analytical techniques. That's a very high yield topic, say knowing what type of chromatography to use, or what type of, Western blot to use, is something that is that's just a straight detail. Other than that, generally chemistry is just, if you can get your reading comprehension through, it's pretty good. So I would favor in the C/P section, definitely question review is your friend here. In a more extreme vein, with cars, you just gotta throw your hands up, because there's no really content review that you can do for the critical analysis reasoning skills thing. Unless you just know everything, which obviously is not a real thing. So just generally being well read and time management are the main topics of concern here. I know there's Jack Weston questions that give free cars passages. That's a common way to practice your time management. The exact questions may not match exactly, but still helps with your just overall getting your gears turning and just reading in general. I think me reading a couple books just to stock up on lit for my quiz bowl helped a little bit, but overall it's just time is your biggest enemy in the car section, and so as long as you can fight your way through that, it should be pretty good. That's a question review side of things. Physics was the topic that I was the most scared about going into content review, but biochem was the one that I knew that I had the most to learn in the first place. Obviously, there was some things that we covered in previous classes, but by and large, there was a lot of new things for me to learn. In fact, I'd say most of my time in content review was in biochem land. Luckily, since biology is paired with biochem, I was able to have one of my more familiar and more comfortable subjects in biology with the biochem that I was learning. So with the biochem passage, after cars, it's probably the most passage analysis based section. There's almost always some knowledge, and then there's a reasoning step, some causal chain that you need to know that gets you to the right answer, with the exception usually of some amino acids questions. But overall, I'm going to go back to something that I said in the chemistry section, in concepts over details. If you have this conceptual knowledge of how things are working and how they interact, it's a lot more useful, it's a lot more sticky in your brain, and it's a lot more applicable to the actual MCAT, because that's how they give the questions, usually your passages, right? And details, these fun facts, these flashcards where you're binarying just a word to an answer, aren't often as useful. They're obviously still useful. Having more facts and more knowledge is never going to hurt you, really. But there's 500 to 700 words, there's 1 to 3 graphs. There's a lot of information that the AAMC packs into those passages, and they're very deliberate with what they write. There's rarely a wasted word in the AAMC, so they put a lot of detail into the actual passage itself. So you need to bring the conceptual understanding and apply the details that they give you in the passage itself. So when it comes to studying for biology, I would say that there was a couple things, just books, right? Books, and then rewriting, and then watching the Yusuf Hassan videos. I said it many times, Yusuf Hassan was my GOAT basically, and helped me through a lot. Biology, not nearly as much. I think the books definitely covered a lot because I was, once again, a lot more familiar with biology. But those are the main things when it came to studying for biology. And then it's a question review from from then on. For Biochem, once again, I basically just watched the Yusuf Hassan videos over and over again instead of using the books. And I had a very specific exercise that I did because there's 3 things that are pretty much straight memorization. This is the deviation that I have from the concept talk, is these are amino acids, the Krebs cycle, and glycolysis. And you can toss in the electron transport chain, as well as the pentose phosphate pump or whatever pathway. Those are a lot less common, a lot less high yield. But for me, outside of learning the general concepts of biochem, these are some things that I went back to over and over again, and I have a bunch of little whiteboards. I would write them down, and I have it on my tablet. I would write it down over and over. Every day when I'd start studying, I would, this is on a piece of paper for my quote-unquote final review packet. I wrote down like all the amino acids, all of their classifications, their 3-letter, their 1-letter, and then I would have this here's glycolysis. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, and then your Krebs cycle. So for me, rewriting a lot was very helpful in my content review. I think it helps me get into my head. Obviously, it's very different for everybody. I know there's Anki users, there's people who just can go over the slides once and they've got it in their head already. But for me, specifically, rewriting a lot was very helpful when it came to my review, just running over it multiple times. So biology, books, and short YouTube videos, and then biochemistry, YouTube videos, watching them several times, and then rewriting all the time for every subject really, but biochem especially. I put a lot of work into rewriting those. So I think a lot of my study time went into biochem, and it did show up because this was my highest ranked section score. But I think that's all I have to say about biochem for now. If you've made it to the Psych Soch section, you can rejoice. This is the free money section, honestly. This is everybody eats arena. Psych Soch, for me, I studied kind of similar to my other sections. I would just read my book, write my notes, reread the book, rewrite my notes. I think this is the most Ankiable, flashcardable section. I didn't use Anki. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But definitely this one would be the easiest to use because a lot of the answers are just one-to-one. If you know the vocab, you get it right, pretty much. So once again, the Reddit will have more actual actionable info on how to use the flashcards for this. For me, I just read and rewrite. That's what worked for me. But the big story with this section is not really the difficulty. It's the complacency aspect. It's the easiest section. It's the last section. You're going to be tired. You're just going to want to get this over with. But you can't take any question for granted. And even in my studying, I think, honestly, I was a little bit complacent. I neglected studying up on my vocabulary a little bit, and it might have bit me on the back a little bit. But overall, as long as you keep your vocab about you, I think it's pretty simple when it comes to Psych Soch. Psychology is pretty mirrored in my actual degree, which is neuroscience. So a lot of the stuff I just was seeing in class at the time would come up in the psych stuff. So I'd seen that many times, so it's pretty easy to remember. Sociology, it's very interesting. It's a lot of philosophy terms, and if you know philosophy, they're very anal about their definitions. So make sure you know how to distinguish between all the different structures and structuralism, functionalism, etc. Right? So as long as you keep your vocab about you and try not to slack off, it should be pretty easy. I had a lot to say about content review. I have one thing and one thing alone to say about question review, and that is, please do it. It is all I beg of you, because question review is the core of a well-realized study plan. So what do I mean by that? First of all, it is the best way to train and emulate actual testing conditions, because the MCAT, it doesn't necessarily test your readiness for medical school or whatever they say on their website. It tests your ability to take an MCAT. Just like how an IQ test tests your IQ, not necessarily your intelligence. There's some correlative value there. There's a reason they exist, but being able to be comfortable in the actual conditions increases your ability to do well in the exam, and that just bears out all the time. There's less stress, performance increases. But more importantly, question review allows you to adapt and engineer your study plan for what you need to know. Because when you make it 6 months in advance, there's no way of knowing what you're going to retain and what you're going to lose faster. And so doing questions and going back and seeing what you got wrong, seeing why you got it wrong, tracing your thought process is really important on the questions you got wrong, as well as the questions you got right. Are really important in knowing where the holes are and where you can return to content review. As you go throughout your study plan, you're obviously going to do more question review, and you'll be able to get higher accuracy, hopefully. And so the amount of content review on the back end you do is going to go down. So it's a nice loop of what you're going to do. And it lets you have a day without really questioning, oh, what am I doing? What am I missing? Right? So UWorld is a big stamp of approval for me. They have great explanations that help me a lot with why I got something wrong. The section banks, I didn't use them, but I know that they are the most accurate representations of the actual MCAT. And then the full-length exams, they are for when you know that you can do the entire thing, because that's your best, closest approximation of a real MCAT. So once again, question review, really important. Work it in throughout the entire study process, because this is how you go back and realize this is where I need to improve, and this is where I feel pretty good, and I can come back in a couple of days, right? And so you don't waste time on frivolous things. This is immediate, strong feedback, and that is the best way to learn and retain. Okay, you've done your prep, test days upon you, several months, if not several years worth of prep is going into taking this MCAT. So all that needs to happen is just take it home, one and done, hopefully, right? So these tests are at the Pearson testing centers, which are pretty strict about their security. So just make sure you're following the rules, or else they might hit you with something that you really don't want to be dealing with, essentially. I don't know how accommodations would work, but what I've heard is that they're also pretty hard to get. So prepare for them several months in advance if you anticipate having accommodations to work with. When it comes to the breaks in the tests, those are pretty important, because you don't get to drink your water or eat anything mid-test. So know when you're going to drink your water and have your little snack. I had a couple bars, I had an orange or two, and definitely some water. It might also be cold. That might be a universal thing to test centers, because I feel like every time I go in and take a test, it's freezing in there. So I had a hoodie, nothing too crazy. As long as you're in a comfortable temperature, it'll help you settle in, make sure you know what you're doing and whatnot. Focus on the test itself and not some other extraneous information. They give you earplugs as well. My testing center had headphones as well. I assume that's pretty universal. So I just put the headphones on and kind of fidgeted with the earplugs all test. I think the person on the camera is watching me drop the earplugs all the time. But anyway, there's also a wet erase board and a marker, which is useful for just writing down your work, essentially. I wouldn't use this as a brain dump of mnemonics, because hopefully it's in your head already because you've studied for months on end. But, just as a refresher, you can write down some of the formulas and whatnot, what you're going to use. I use the wet erase board mostly in the chemistry phys section, where I wrote down every single step of my calculations pretty extensively, just so I can go back and trace it when I was going back to double check my answers. When it comes to test day as well, just arrive early. That's pretty simple advice, and trust your preparation, because there isn't that much you can sort of derive on test day. If you know it, you'll know it, or if it's in the passage, you'll pull it from the passage. You can't just sit around and hope that you randomly remember something. You just have to keep going, and if it comes back, it comes back. That's kind of all I had to say about general remarks when it comes to test day, and then I'll talk about my individual exam and the different sections and whatnot. So let's get into that. Chem Phys was my worst section percentile-wise. I put the numbers up on the board over there, and I definitely agree. As I was leaving the test, I also said Chem Phys was pretty rough. I think the MCAT does well to represent how well you actually did. I think it's kind of hard to fraud higher or even lower than you quote-unquote deserve based on your performance. I think they do a good job of scaling that. For the section itself, I think I lost some EM knowledge, and I completely forgot what Young's modulus was. So physics side, I could have hit more and studied a little bit more there. I just had to hope my guesses were good enough. I did end up having the most time trouble out of all the other sections, where I answered all the questions, but if I had even 5 more minutes to double check, I would have felt a lot better about how I was doing, because I basically flagged on this one. I almost run out of time. Overall, kind of a rough start. I think I was just getting my morning jitters, test day jitters out of the way as well, and I just had to hope I had enough in the break to reset. For cars, I got a 130 out of 132, which was on the 98th percentile. Honestly, this might have been the most disappointed I was out of the scores, because if I were to get more than a 523, I think this section is where the points would have came from. I don't think I would have done better on the Chem Phys or the Psych Soc section, really. Definitely my 523 is chalked up to getting a 130 here. I felt pretty bad, because I was doing better on the practice exams than the actual exam, and I'd cope and say that it was due to residual nerves from the Chem Phys section. Really just not being able to compartmentalize and put that behind me kind of hurt me there. And this was the second most time trouble I felt out of the different tests. Unlike Chem Phys, I did answer everything and felt okay, and I had a couple of minutes to spare, but I still was pretty cut for time, basically. So maybe if I read faster a little bit or whatnot, there could have been more points there. But afterwards, there was a big break, and that I think really changed my look on the test because I was able to fully reset and come back into the biochem and start strong, basically. So biochem was my best score. I got a 132, 100th percentile. And that was good because I put a huge emphasis on it during my actual study time. So I'm glad that it definitely paid off. Yusuf Hassan, my goat as usual, and then all my teachers as well. Thank you for helping me out there. And the actual questions themselves were pretty business as usual, honestly. It was very much similar to what I practiced on the UWorld, on the full length exams. And the break before was more of the help here because I was just pacing around almost nervously and just drinking water during this longer halftime break. And I think that let me burn off some of that energy and build back some of my confidence that I lost during Chem Phys and cars. And then I just built up some momentum from, say, the first passage being on the easier side in my mind. And so if I got stumped, I don't know how the complexion of the rest of the test would have changed. But I started building a lot more of my momentum back, and I'm quite glad it paid off on the actual scorecard. For Psych Soc, I ended up getting a 131, which was the 97th percentile, and maybe it was a little bit of luck here. I think I was perhaps on the cusp of a 130 on the 131 here, but I did well enough. We take those, right? It was the last section, and I definitely felt it being the last section. I really wanted to get through, but just make sure you put one question at a time because I also felt the lack of the final review. Those last couple of days, my final review was still pretty biochem and Chem Phys centric, and so I lost some of the vocab that would have made this section a little bit easier. And I was feeling really good coming out of biochem, like really, really good. And then my confidence got rocked a little bit because I was forgetting a couple random vocab terms that went from, oh, I know this 100% down to say, oh, I think I know this, right? But overall, I think I did well enough, and it was really just a vocab list thing for the questions that I felt a little bit off about. Other ones were pretty simple. Like I said, this is on the easier side of the test, so just let your vocab take you home, really. Breaks were the biggest difference that I had from my actual test day to my practice days because on my practice days, I was just really flying through the exams as fast as possible, just so I can get back to the question review side of things. On test day, I definitely did not. I tried to talk my way through every single question, which may have been much slower, but it helped me with my confidence. And having that confidence up is almost as important as getting the questions right at some points, because as long as you feel like you can get the right answer, you are more likely to get the right answer. You're more attuned to the things that they'll want you to pick up. It's like a flow state type thing. So for breaks, it's a good way to reset from this high cognitive load topic of talking my way through these questions to just walking around, at least getting a sip of water, right? Because if you're nervous, you're scared, then your throat's drying up and you're thinking of other random physiological things instead of the actual test at hand. So at least use the breaks to get a sip of water. And once again, the name of the game is resetting. You want to have a short memory when it comes to these sections and just power through it. Get through the thing in front of you. If I were to break this whole experience up into just one good thing and one thing maybe I could have done better, I would say that 3-week boot camp from July 25th to, say, August 14th was huge in helping supercharge my confidence and actually take the exam. I know early mid-July I was seriously considering postponing or even waiting until next year to take the MCAT. And that boot camp really helped me realize that, I'll do it right now. I can do it right now. And it was more of a fear thing than an actual loss of ability, really. One bad thing, I would say not using Anki could have hurt me, especially on Psych Soc, I would say. And perhaps I was just lazy. I'm not really a power user of every med student's favorite app, but I'm still learning how to use Anki. And as well, maybe I just didn't think that the 3 months was enough to get the full use out of Anki. Either way, if I were to go back, I think I would still, even if it was a short time period, incorporate some Anki into my studying just so I can
have a way to keep me accountable on making sure every topic is topped up and not just the thing that I was studying the day before and that I did question review on. But overall, when it comes to the MCAT, it's only as scary as you allow it to be, and 85,000 people take the MCAT every year, and so there's enough solidarity to really go around. And I hope this video was helpful in even a small way of helping you on your MCAT study journey. And please, if you're inclined and like the video, like, comment, share, subscribe, and whatnot. I've been on the grind. We're trying to get this channel up. And yeah, I hope this video helps you do better than me. Perhaps not too much better, but good luck and take care. Thank you for watching.